All right, people. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. We're back to close off November right before we get into the last month of the year. That's right. 2021 is almost over. You could tell by my
Crazy.
shadowy, ominous, gloomy, gloomy lighting that we're clearly doing House of Gucci. I've got Adam Sober back from, I don't really know where he's been, but he's been doing quite a lot recently. Adam, happy to have you back on the show, dude. How have you been?
I've been great. Thank you for having me, man. I mean, this past year has been such a
A shit
roller
show.
coaster, a shit show, a roller coaster. A lot of things have happened since we graduated, and
Yeah,
the last time I was
it
on
was
was
pre-pandemic.
yeah, it was literally like a month or two before I moved up to Liverpool.
Syracuse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and because I went, it was you and Brandon,
Yep.
and so yeah, I mean, I moved up, and then just the world just started to collapse.
What?
Um, but right now I'm in a very fortunate and very lucky position.
That's good. Yeah,
I
well,
just
we're
yeah,
here to review House of Gucci today, and all of that and more. Stay
cool.
tuned. Oh yeah, we've upgraded since the last time you were
It
here. We got
seems like
graphics
it.
now. We got music now. Yeah, that's how long it's been since Adam has been on the channel. He hasn't been brought up with all of the new changes. But people, like I said, we are reviewing Ridley Scott's second film that he's put out within 2021. The dude is 80
Hmm,
plus years old, and I still have no idea how he manages to do this, but he somehow has. We are here to
mhm.
review House of Gucci, which is the film that semi-chronicles the rise and fall of the Gucci empire, which is ironic considering the fact that it's one of the biggest fashion labels in the world, but it didn't quite happen until all of the family members had left the agency. This is a film that stars Adam Driver, Lady Gaga, Jared Leto in some sort of makeup job that makes him look like a stuffed pig, Jeremy Irons and Al Pacino. It is one of the most it is one of the most hyped up movies of the year simply for the fact that it's not a Marvel superhero movie. It
It's
supposedly is
true.
getting slated for a bunch of Oscars. Adam, before we get this started, what is your previous relationship with Ridley Scott movies? How many Ridley Scott movies have you seen previously? Like, what are you a fan of his
Oh
filmmaking?
man, I mean, I love Ridley Scott. I mean, Blade Runner for me was one of the films that got me really into filmmaking in high school. I watched it in my film class, and I just fell in love. Like developed I mean, I've loved movies since I was really young, but that was one of those films that just changed the game. Not only for me, I mean, just in the genre of like being a neo-noir, sci-fi, philosophical, like it did so many things. It touched on so many topics. And it's still one of, I think, the greatest films made in cinema history.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
Yeah, Ridley Scott, the whole thing about him with me is that if Ridley Scott's doing an epic, like a historical epic or a sci-fi movie,
mhm,
sign me up. Like,
yeah.
because again, like you look at what are the biggest Ridley Scott movies that people come to know and like have really ingrained themselves with its
Mhm,
staples of the pop culture, right? Alien, Blade Runner,
mhm,
Gladiator. You get a random one-off
yeah.
sometimes, like he'll do like a Thelma and Louise, and that usually can break through, like a Master
Mhm.
Man, which I really like, American Gangster, which kind of flew under the radar back in the day. But
Underrated, underrated.
very, very
Yeah.
underrated. But Ridley Scott is one of those really interesting filmmakers where so he was technically a part of the film Bratz generation in the 70s, but like George Miller, he didn't really break out until the very end of the decade, right? Because Alien
Mhm.
didn't come out until 79, and he only had one film before that, The
Yeah.
Duelists. He's
Hmm.
always I don't know, like whenever you think of a Ridley Scott movie, you never think of it in the sense of like a Spielberg or a Tarantino movie, in the sense that like he's an incredible filmmaker, but
Mhm.
you don't necessarily recognize him because of stylistic choices, right? Like with
Mhm.
Scorsese, you always recognize the camera techniques and the
Exactly.
similar actors that he has and the tones that he goes with. Same thing with
Mhm.
Spielberg, same thing with Tarantino. But with Scott, you never
He
necessarily.
likes to change up his style. I really like that. I mean, I love being able to do lots of different stories because you should have a style, but you should also be able to speak to lots of different things as a director, as a filmmaker, as a creator, as a creative. Um, so when it comes to Scott, I think with his kind of style, he tailors it to every project he does. I definitely liked House of Gucci more than All the Money in the World, although that was amazing how he pulled that off, especially with the scandal. With Christopher Plummer, who
Yeah.
is amazing, and he came in and learned his lines and replaced and did all those scenes in like I
I
don't
like
know, like
3
2 months.
days, 3 days, I think it was 3 days of filmmaking, and he was the only person recognized at the Oscars for that movie, which is
Wow.
insane to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you think about Christopher Plummer, I mean his impact. That's a whole separate episode we could do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean Ridley Scott is definitely super influential on me. Spielberg as well. I mean, I grew up, one of the things also was Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, masterpiece of a movie. When I went to Disney World and saw like the behind the scenes thing, I just fell in love. So yeah, from a really young age, I've had a passion for it. Um, so yeah, is there anything?
Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
the big thing that really that my whole thing with Ridley Scott is that he's an amazing filmmaker, but I don't necessarily know if he's one of those people who's adapted to modern day sensibilities in filmmaking to the best of his ability. So, like, I guess,
Mhm,
like, if we could break down a little bit of the history, right? So, Ridley Scott, the insane thing is that he's one of those directors who's had arguably like one of the most influential films of the decade for like
mhm.
4 straight decades in a row. That's
Yeah.
not an easy feat. Alien for the 70s, Blade Runner
Mhm.
for the 80s, Thelma and Louise for the 90s, Gladiator for and Gladiator for the 2000s, right?
Yeah.
The 2010s, I guess you can make an argument for The Martian, maybe, but it's very like again incredibly
Right.
influential and
Mhm,
just big enough in order to like get him a lot of like really good praise. But like the thing is that like then you get the smaller Ridley Scott movies, right? The ones that come like in between the big ones, like and the ones that like nobody's heard of, like Somebody to Watch Over Me, White Squall, Black
mhm.
Rain, GI Jane, like these movies that nobody has heard of, like
Really, really
nobody.
just in the background, none of his
Like
his
Adam,
big
be
name.
honest, you've never heard of any of those movies that I just listed.
Nope.
Exactly.
And I'm a Ridley Scott fan, so
Exactly.
you said those
Exactly.
and I was like,
You're like,
"The fuck?"
what?
Yeah. I was trying to see if I knew any of those because like I'm big
And
on
I'm like, I can
Letterboxd.
promise you, you haven't. But so
Yeah.
something really weird happened in the 2010s, which is where, so
Mhm,
in the late 2000s, after American Gangster, Ridley Scott had a couple movies that came out that were not well received, to say the least. Because,
mhm.
Adam, a little bit of a trivia question. Do you know what movie he released immediately after American Gangster?
Oh, man.
A little bit of trivia for you. I want to see if you get this.
Oh, that's hard. After American Gangster, what did he do in between that and The Martian?
A lot
Um,
of movies, actually. It's kind
but
of
like
insane.
big ones?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, because 'cause I'm
Oh,
trying
so you
to
wanna know what they are? So in
yeah.
between American Gangster and The Martians, you got a 8-year gap between them. American Gangster's
Mhm,
'07, The Martians 2015. You got Body of Lies in 2008, starring Leo DiCaprio and
haven't
Russell
seen
Crowe.
that.
Yes, famously, Leo
Mhm,
DiCaprio has collaborated with Ridley Scott. Then you
mm,
get the Russell Crowe Robin Hood in 2010. You
mhm.
get Prometheus in 2012. You get The
Saw that.
Counselor in 2013, and then you get Exodus: Gods and Kings in 2014. And
Okay.
all of those movies have got with the exception of Body of Lies, I'll say, have got a reputation around them for not necessarily the best reasons. Robin Hood was pretty critically reviled when it came out.
Mhm,
Prometheus was very critically divisive, but in recent years, it's gotten more of like a cult following recently. I think that's probably because of the good grace that Damon Lindelof has earned in recent years.
mhm.
The Counselor is still one of the most baffling movies I've ever seen.
I
Like
haven't seen
ever.
that one
It
either.
is if you want a movie that you just want to like are scratching your head at both how this movie got made and just how it's functioning, just
Mhm,
watch that movie. And then Exodus: Gods and Kings, which famously earned Ridley Scott the phrase where he said, "Oh yeah, I'm not going to cast Middle Eastern actors to play Middle Eastern characters because nobody will watch it because it's not movie stars." Famously, a controversial quote to
yeah.
say the least. So that was really the moment where it started to show like necessarily his age, as far as okay, so he's not really making movies for audiences really
Mhm,
anymore, especially recently since he's now added himself to the list of directors that have just
mhm.
gone after superhero movies. So yeah,
Yeah.
because in order for like social media hype. But so
That's also another subject about superhero movies and just I mean, I'm a big superhero guy, you know that. Having that honestly, I think of superhero movies as like the new westerns
yeah,
because they're so popular. Like, when
right.
are we gonna get sick of it? Like, there were so many westerns made in like the I don't know, like
Right.
40s and 50s and stuff. But I think superhero movies are honestly the new Western
Right.
because they're making tons of money. They have, they're getting all these big names in there. Sorry, I'm getting off on a
No, but like,
tangent.
no, but yeah, go with it. You get.
Um, but I do think that there's merit to these superhero movies. I think a lot of them are art. I don't think they're the roller coaster ride that Scorsese described them as. I mean, I think a lot of them can speak to political issues. A lot of them speak to social issues. World problems. People resonate and I think really appreciate all these different characters that they can relate to in a very real way.
My whole
Um,
thing with the whole superhero thing, as far as that go, and like with Scott's contribution to it, is I'm not necessarily going to like say that any of the directors are necessarily wrong or right for having their opinion. They just have their opinions on them. My whole thing is I'm just mad at the media machine constantly baiting them into these types of responses, because that's literally all they do. They just bait them into these types of responses so they
hmm,
can get the Twitter crowd angry and flustered.
yeah,
Because that's kind of what it comes down to. My
yeah,
whole thing is I like superhero movies. I don't necessarily enjoy all of them the way that I used to. I'm not necessarily like craving every new bit of superhero content. I do
hmm,
definitely think, and I think this also has to do with the fact that we are living in the social media machine, which is why it feels so much more
hmm,
apparent than, say, when the Westerns came out, is that
yeah,
it is that because we are inundated with so many of them per year, it's not that they're bad movies, but they've kind of
hmm,
lost a little bit of their luster in the sense
hmm,
that like how different can you really make them when there are so many being made a year,
yeah.
you know?
They do a lot of them do start to feel a little cookie cutter, but I think that's honestly just a problem with the basic 3 act or 8 sequence structure that most movies have. So, you got when it comes to superhero movies, it's all the same just with different characters and different things happening. And then at the end there's a huge fight. It's
Right.
kind of it's formulaic. So
Marvel.
yeah. I mean, DC tries to be
Yeah.
different, which I appreciate. I'm very excited for the Batman.
Yeah.
With DC's Black Label, they're doing lots of really cool stuff. But DC, I'm not a huge fan of the movies. I think some of them have done really well. Um, like I think Snyder, the trilogy, there's some positives, some negatives. First and foremost, I'm a DC fan, so I'm
Right.
always gonna have that little bit of bias
Did you
behind
see that,
me.
did you see that Snyder's doing he's wrapping up his, Justice League arc in comic book form?
Really?
Yeah, go ahead,
I
look it
gotta
up. He
pick that
was
up.
very, but he again, like I saw yesterday, he posted something on Twitter, like the social media.
Yeah.
He's already getting the Twitter crowd stirred again. He posted like a pic of Thanksgiving pie, then he posted like a comic book pic of like his version of Darkseid, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh boy, here we go again. Here we go again. We got friggin' 5 years of this that finally culminated in the Snyder Cut. We're doing it again. But
Yeah.
I guess if anything, to bring it back to Ridley Scott, the point being is that Ridley Scott in recent years has not necessarily had the best track record, where he's almost a little bit
Mhm.
become like a little bit of a Steven Soderbergh, where he's
Mhm.
pumping out all these films. Again, this is the second year in 4 years that he's put out
Mhm.
two movies, right? Because he famously put out Alien Covenant and All the Money in the World in 2017, and now
Yeah.
he put out The Last Duel and House of Gucci this year. But I don't necessarily know if he's making movies anymore to really say something. It feels
Mhm.
like he's just making movies for the sake of making movies. That reflected, I
Mhm.
think, in The Last Duel, where you have a movie that, I'm sorry, Matt Damon and Ben
Mhm.
Affleck as medieval characters. Get the fuck out of here. Like, that's first and foremost rule number one, besides the fact that the makeup looks horrendous in that movie. And the
Yeah.
fact that, okay, they have the gall to say that that movie's like Rashomon when they
Mhm.
don't even clearly understand like how Rashomon actually works structure wise. Okay. And now you have this movie, which, if I can get into a little bit of my spoiler-free thoughts, functions somewhat like this strange mix between a Scorsese biopic, a
Mhm.
weird film version of Succession,
Mhm.
and an SNL stage play, I guess, is probably like the nicest that I could give it. Where I saw the movie yesterday with my grandma, and throughout the first half of the movie, I'm constantly scratching my head and wondering, I'm like, is this a comedy? Like, what the hell is this movie trying to accomplish? Like, you have
Yeah.
Lady Gaga and Adam Driver in these
Mhm.
ridiculous looking costumes doing these ridiculous accents. Like, everything is so puffed up, everything is so ham, everything is so over the top. But like, it's intriguing to say the least. Like,
Mhm.
the story itself, in and of itself, is fascinating because we're
Yeah.
kind of seeing this flux of stories where about, just because of like social media, and because like certain things that are like were
Mhm.
previously inaccessible are now so accessible. You're kind of getting into like these, these massive like kind of, sprawling families, and kind of getting like essentially like the new version of the crime epic, but in the form of like these strange like family like what's the word I'm looking for the god, for like family like tragic
Dynamic.
downfall, exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
stories. So I don't know, I guess brass tacks, immediate first thoughts after watching the movie, because like I kind of coaxed you into it, because you were kind of like, oh, we should do Ghostbusters, we should do this, we should do this, and I'm like, nah, we got to do this. After I watched that,
Okay.
I'm like, I need
I'm
to
I'm
talk
glad
about this
I'm
movie.
glad I watched it. I have it's still fresh in my mind, so I have lots of conflicting. I mean, I read the article.
Oh
I read
yeah,
I read the article. I think I'm very much on the same
page,
page with you,
yeah,
but not for nothing. I think it does a good like I get what you're saying about the Scorsese biopic thing. It felt almost like I don't want to say Wolf of Wall Street because Wolf of Wall Street's
no,
amazing. But it did, it for the only thing that really reminded me of it and paralleled there was him, becoming greedy and not caring for his wife and then having the affair and, that kind of bringing in, drama, but uh I think overall it tried to do a lot of things. It, like reading the article, I was also, yeah, like I laughed, you know,
yeah.
uh I
To
laughed at a
reference
few
what
times.
Adam's talking about, I sent him an entertainment weekly magazine article that I
Mhm,
watched last night, which is a breakdown where they interviewed Tom Ford, the film director and fashion designer, who famously is in this movie. Not that you would know it, because if you don't recognize the name, you'll blink or you'll miss it. Oh, Tom Ford famously worked with some of the characters in this movie, some of the Gucci that you see in this movie, and
mhm.
famously helped to bring Gucci to what it is. And he was interviewed, and the quotes that he said, and this is still one of my favorite quotes I think I've ever seen for an immediate film reaction afterwards, where his exact quote is, "The film is dot dot dot. Well, I'm still not quite sure what it is exactly, but somehow I felt as though I'd lived through a hurricane when I left the theater. Was it a farce or a gripping tale of greed? I often laughed out loud, but was I supposed to?" And I don't think I've ever agreed with an immediate take on a film from somebody within the industry as hard as I have with this one. Like, it's kind of insane how it
Yeah.
captured my exact thoughts after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Ford is ama he's only done what, 2
Two
things?
films.
Or
Two
2
films. Single
films,
Man
and
and Nocturnal Animals.
I've only seen Nocturnal Animals. I need to see A Single Man. Tom Ford, he has such a great sense of story and character. I mean, obviously wardrobe, duh.
Clearly.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there were times like this is a spoiler, so
Yes.
I felt the sex scene where was a little too long,
I was laughing
a little.
hard at that. I
It
was
was
literally,
yeah.
I was literally like, I don't even know what this is supposed to be.
Yeah, it was like I was like, "Oh, this is going on a little long." It was, it was, I was, and then it cuts to the wedding.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm laughing thinking about it. There was a line by Jared Leto where he's like, "You a sack of potatoes." I was like, I don't, a lot of it was really funny. I think
Right, but that's the problem, is wasn't supposed to be. Like, I have to imagine where I'm like, I would
it went
it's
back and
this
forth.
yeah, this is one of the first instances in a long time, in a long, long time, where I would have just loved to have been on the set during the day, just to see like what the direction was, and like just
Yeah.
figure out where the motivation was coming from. Because like for the life of me, I have no idea what Ridley
Mhm.
Scott was trying to do with this movie. Like, this is famously like Ridley Scott's had a
Mhm.
couple of these where this is a project that he had lingering in development hell
Mhm.
since the early 2000s. And I don't necessarily know had he made it a decade or 2 decades ago, it would have
Mhm.
made that much of a difference. But just considering the fact that the film plays out as like part farce, part
Mhm.
tragic tale of greed. Like, I don't know, like, did
Yeah.
this almost feel like an Adam McKay parody at times, but without the self-awareness?
Honestly, a little bit, but I mean, you could chalk that up to maybe the editing. Maybe the
Sure,
editor
sure.
saw something. I mean, obviously Ridley Scott oversaw it. But maybe that was the best that they got for those scenes and he felt, I mean, sometimes when you're watching things, you think, "Oh, this will work. This will be funny." I think he did a good job balancing, trying to balance the tone. I mean, at the end, it gets, you see him get shot and killed.
Right.
But there's so many different moments in the movie. I mean, how can you put someone's life into, 2.5
Right.
hours?
And then of
So I
course
think
that's where
he I
this
think I
right.
think I think not for nothing, he tried to do a lot because it is so much to try
Right.
and encompass a person with so much, emotional depth. I did think there were things that didn't work, but I don't think that didn't that ruined the whole movie for me. I
Yeah.
still enjoyed it. Um, obviously the costumes were great. The set design was amazing. I didn't think the accents were that bad. I did think Jared Leto looked like he was in some kind of rubber, like face mask, rubber suit, like, um,
I still remember, dude. I don't know if I said this to you. I still remember when the first poster that had like the whole cast lined up. It's like getting ready for like the Oscar promotional campaign, and I just saw Jared Leto, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what are you doing, man? Come
Jared Leto.
on.
Jared Leto pops into everything.
Jared Leto is just like the king of online trolling at this point, and I'm like, look,
I mean,
as long
he's
as
a good
people,
actor.
yeah,
I mean, people hate on him a lot, but I think he's a good actor. I think, he's
it,
very, very talented.
it,
It felt very hokey and campy,
yeah,
like
it's
in
times
the
like these.
article.
I wish that Chris was here because Ridley Scott's one of Chris's favorite filmmakers, and whenever Jared Leto comes up in conversation, he actually like has a lot of insight. But like just to break it down for people, like what this movie's about, because I just realized we've been talking about this movie
Mhm,
the entire time, but like there may be people who like don't actually know what this movie's about. So this movie is actually based on the book that was written in 2001, The House of Gucci, a sensational story of murder,
mhm,
madness, glamour, and greed by Sarah Gay Forden. Right, it famously follows events that occurred between the late 70s and the early 90s, in which the heir to the Gucci empire, Maurizio Gucci, played in the film by Adam Driver, he's the son of
mhm,
Rodolfo Gucci, portrayed by Jeremy Irons, ends up falling for Patrizia Reggiani,
mhm,
who in the film is the daughter of a truck driver who ends up worming her way into the Gucci empire and starts to tear it down from within, obviously
mhm,
bringing her into conflict with the other controlling interest in the company, that being Al Pacino's Aldo Gucci and his son, Jared Leto, as Paolo Gucci. And
mhm,
so the film, I guess if I can break it down. So like as far as like the start of like some of my problems with it, and like kind of why I bring up the comparison
mhm,
to Martin Scorsese, is that the thing about it is that whenever you watch a Scorsese biopic, like there is just something about the way that Scorsese does a biopic
mhm,
that really differentiates it from like most run-of-the-mill biopics, right? It's weird because biopics have been in this really weird spot for the last couple of years, ever because the problem is Bohemian Rhapsody really kind of like started to screw them over as far as like breaking down the lines of like, oh, what's real versus what's fictitious? Is this actually like trying to be an ode to the real person, or is
mhm,
this trying to like just create more sensationalism, popcorn fun for entertaining people? Because
mhm.
we both know like kind of what a crapshoot Bohemian Rhapsody was, but there are still a lot of people who love
Yeah,
that movie, and that movie made a lot of money. Do I think this movie's gonna have the same impact? No, because just
no.
I don't know how many people are gonna relate to like the Gucci label the same way that they would
Yeah.
to Freddie
Well,
Mercury.
it's a huge name. I think people are interested uh in the Gucci name. I don't know. I mean, obviously Freddie Mercury is a whole different thing. I was surprised that man, who was it?
Rami
But
Malek or
yeah. Um no, I wasn't surprised that he won. Like it made sense out of the lineup of that year, I think. I don't remember the other nominees.
there were
Um
only two that should have been there. Put it that way.
wait,
So it
who
was it
else?
was Bale for Vice and Bradley Cooper for Star is Born, and
Right.
those are the only
Right.
two that should have been nominated to begin
I
with.
think I think uh I think Bale should have taken it for Vice. I mean, he was great as Dick Cheney.
Yeah,
He the voice, the weight he put on, the cadence of I mean, really everything. But back to Bohemian Rhapsody, I think um that was different. It won a lot of Oscars. The sound was great because you can't tell whose voice, you don't know if it's Rami, you don't know if it's a mixture of Freddie's vocals, you don't
right.
know if it's Adam Levine, I think, came on and did something. Um and then there was Rocket Man,
Oh,
which
he
with,
did he
I'm
did something all
surprised
right in that movie.
I'm surprised Taron Egerton didn't get nominated for Rocket Man.
I am not, because I think that enough people were still burned out from it, and also
Mhm,
Bohemian Rhapsody opened up late. It's the release date. Bohemian Rhapsody opened up in October.
mhm,
What's it called? Rocket Man opened in May. So
uh-huh,
yeah, so there was a big
hmm,
disparity there just as far as the release dates. But I guess kind of like my whole thing with this is as far as the whole House of Gucci argument is, it
mhm,
feels feels like it's trying to be like this epic, sprawling tale of
Yeah.
like crime and intrigue, right? But it feels like after like the first hour of the movie, it feels like every other scene, there's a scene missing, right? Where you have a
Mhm.
movie that is 2.5 hours long, and and it's very
Mhm.
strange because it's very similar to another film that I saw earlier this year, obviously The Many Saints of Newark, right? The
Mhm.
Sopranos prequel movie that dropped on HBO Max, where it feels like a longer cut was
Mhm.
desperately needed. And we both know that like this is well known. Ridley Scott is well
Mhm.
known for his director's cuts. Famously, just look no further than Kingdom of Heaven with
Yeah.
the 3 hour long director's cut of that, which might be one of the best epic historical epic films ever made. Like that
Mhm.
truly does feel like a modern day Lawrence of Arabia. But that I feel like is problem number one because that kind of contributes to like some of the plot antics and plot semantics of it because
Mhm.
I feel like at a certain point, it's like the film will just be jumping around to like random things and character motivations start to not make sense at a certain point. And it feels like there are certain things that are missing that it feels like there should be included. And I
Mhm.
definitely think that the biggest thing that doesn't help is the fact that because the film is so way down in its tone, I
Mhm.
don't necessarily think that that makes for the most compelling of characters because just for my money at least the minute that each and every one of these characters are introduced I got them figured out like immediately and I know
Mhm.
exactly where they're gonna go. I know that you could just tell like I know that Gaga is gonna like cause the unraveling and is gonna try and
Mhm.
worm her way up and I know that Pacino is gonna be the kindly old man who gets screwed over and at that point I'm just
Mhm.
kind of waiting for him to have the explosive Pacino moment that we all know is coming, you know.
Yeah.
and,
I mean,
and
Pacino's great in everything he does. I mean,
yeah, of
I
course.
think he was a highlight of this movie. I mean, he wasn't in it much, but I think he was a highlight. Um, the makeup job they did on Jeremy Irons was good. Which I didn't think his accent was
Yeah, I was about to say, I'll bring
awful.
up one thing. I'm like, so wait, everyone is of course going after Jared Leto because he just makes himself a target, but nobody's going to talk about how awful Jeremy Irons, whatever the
Yeah.
fuck accent that was,
Yeah.
is.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I think Jeremy Irons was also, he wasn't in it much. Um, but he does make an impact as a character. Like, I do agree with Ford on that. Uh, but when it comes to the other characters, I don't think Adam Driver was phoning it in. I think he gives a good natural performance. Um, like there were a few scenes that were really nice and really like heartwarming, like him, with the baby and then you see, but that's like before any of the drama. Him and when they get married and all that. Uh but yeah, Lady Gaga I think was good. I think she carried a lot. I think she carried a lot of the weight. Not that they're not both amazing actors. Um but I just felt, I don't know what it was. I just think maybe with Adam Driver, we could have seen a little. I wanted to see more. I wanted to see the same emotional range that he had in like Marriage Story. Obviously different story, different films, different character. But I would have liked to see a little. I mean, there's one scene that was like frightening with when he puts his hands around her and throws her up against the door or the wall.
Right,
um, and it's also very different from Annette, which was
right.
I think he gave his one of his best performances in that film. That movie of the one of the top movies of the year for me, at least. But I would have liked to see a little bit more with that character. I do think Lady Gaga did a really good job.
Yeah, Lady Gaga for me was definitely one of the highlights, but I'm
Hmm.
with you as far as Driver. Like for me, the biggest thing that I see with Driver in this movie is kind of the through line to like obviously like kind of
Hmm.
when he starts to realize that Gaga is screwing with him and just screwing with everything he knows. And then he finally divorces her, and
Hmm.
you're like, okay, thank God, like you're just waiting. But then all of a sudden, okay, now he's an evil businessman. Like there felt
Hmm.
like there was something missing there,
Yeah,
you know?
we didn't see the evolution or de-evolution of the character to the point where we believe that he's a bastard.
Right,
We're supposed to, because by the end of it, you're like, wow, what a sicko. You're like, what a, and then, but
right.
we didn't see anything we felt like the middle was missing of him going, like we see all the money and stuff and behind the scenes, but we don't really get like a turning point moment or maybe we do, and I just didn't catch it. But we don't really get like a turning point moment where we're like, wow. Or maybe that turning point was him with the affair and the what was it?
Oh yeah,
The
you mean the affair that literally comes out of nowhere? They've just run to Switzerland, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, this is my super old friend that I'm clearly gonna cheat on you with."
Yeah, yeah, I mean, maybe that was his, I'm a douchebag moment now. Um, but yeah, I mean, it felt like something was kind of was missing to see that character become someone, completely different.
Yeah, it's one of those instances where, and I'm glad that you're helping because this is
Mhm,
kind of like helping to contextualize a lot of the problems that they have. Because I do like, as problematic and as kind of jumpy and all over the place as the tone is, I do like the first hour of the movie. I do think that like the build up, them meeting, it's a little bit traditionalist biopic. I feel like it could have been done a little bit more, but it does feel that's the most interesting part of the movie, being introduced to this world, being introduced to this empire, like kind of what it means. But you're right, because around the middle half, it starts to feel like a whole lot of moments that are just happening, and kind of like the juicy behind the scenes character moments aren't there, right? And a lot of it feels like it was cut for time just in order to like make, because again, Ridley Scott's like one of the only filmmakers that can get like a 2.5 hour runtime, and
mhm,
this is an Oscar bait film. So obviously the producers are going to let this be a little bit on the longer side because, Oscar films, especially more recently, have tended to be a little bit on the longer side
mhm,
unless they're A24. But the biggest thing for me is because it's seemingly like missing that
mhm,
natural through line, it makes it almost feel just like a series of vignettes that are tied together rather than an actual full, complete vision of a film. And I guess this is the part where I wanted to jump in and have the streaming discussion, because this is
mhm,
really a thing that is, I'm starting to see impact a lot of the films that are coming out now, which is, and I've had this discussion, right? Because again, it's very, very similar to the discussion that I had around Many Saints of Newark, which is where I'm like, okay, it seems to me that with all these films that are coming out now, it's either longer cut or miniseries. And
mhm,
they are constantly in this mode now where, and you especially see this from these directors, where these directors are so against the idea of kind of everything becoming streaming and everything becoming television and everything becoming content,
mhm,
quote unquote, and they have to preserve the theatrical experience. But the problem is the films are most of the time not good enough to justify it. Like I'm sorry, and
mhm,
I know I gave Denny Villeneuve flack about this a couple weeks ago, but we know the HBO Max thing was not his fault. But Dune, to me,
mhm,
the HBO Max thing, weirdly enough, helped. But Dune to me was the first truly cinematic film that I've seen in a while,
mhm.
probably since Tenet. I know, we've all had the Tenet discussion
Yeah.
up at this point. That's been done to death. But like, be honest, Adam, how many films now? Like, obviously, we hear directors talking and crying and
Mhm,
complaining about the preserving the theatrical experience, but even the greats like Spielberg with his West Side Story movie, like, I'm sorry, that doesn't
mhm,
necessarily look like it's worth watching in a theater to me, you know? So, like, I
mhm,
guess just my question is like,
mhm,
is there like a more proper version as to like how to watch this? Like, does this deserve the mini? Especially because again, like you
mhm,
have so many examples of a story like this working much better in a long
mhm.
form televised form rather than in a theatrical form. Like you have
Yeah.
Succession, you have Billions, you have all these different shows that focus on these types of like corporate
Mhm.
machinations, like kind of like the corporate intrigue and drama. Like it
Yeah.
really does suit itself more so for dramatic long form television. So I almost can't help but
Mhm.
feeling in this instance that this would have been more interesting as a miniseries. But I don't know. What's your take on that?
Wow. I mean, now that you bring that up, it reminds me of, they did a mini series about, Versace.
There you go. The second in the American Crime Story. Yeah.
I mean, what was that on FX or
Yeah,
something?
FX. Yep. Because it was the follow
Yeah.
up to People for Soj.
I mean, I think that would have been cool if they did this as a, like, a little mini, 1 season thing to get everything in, but, maybe Ridley Scott didn't wanna do that. I don't think at his age, he's not someone who's trying to get onto small screen or,
Right.
with his name that he wants people in the theater. He wants people to see it on the big screen, um, which is understandable. I think when it comes to streaming, uh, it's both good and bad because, or at least for movies. For TV, it's great. For movies, it is taking away from the big screen experience, the sound, when you go into a theater, it's a different experience. It's a much more intimate way to kind of escape into the story. Um, so I think when it comes to just the story of Gucci overall, I don't know if it has the draw to bring people to theaters
Right.
like other movies do. Um, I think there are plenty of movies that are getting people back to theaters because they were so damaged last year by Corona and people being afraid. And like I myself, I mean, I'm a huge moviegoer, and I wasn't able to go for a long time. I went after I got vaccinated. And that's it was a weird thing to watch movies on my TV or my computer, just because it wasn't the same. I mean, you experience it differently when you sit in the theater.
Right. I think that's an interesting point, because the thing that I've noticed a lot is I was absolutely convinced that
Mhm,
theaters were gone during the pandemic. I'm like, there's no way they can come back. There's no
mhm,
way that financially they can make a comeback from this, obviously, just with everything that happened during COVID. And then I
mhm.
was obviously shocked once things started to opening and just how excited people were to get out, right? But that obviously had to do with, being trapped in their houses and not being able to go anywhere for a year. But now that
Mhm.
we've had like a couple months, we've had roughly like 6 to 7 months now, people going back to movies. And now
Yep.
that we've effectively like gotten out of like the summer blockbuster phase, and we're in a little bit of an Oscar season right now, right?
Mhm.
You have movies like King Richard and Belfast and movies like that
Mhm.
that are coming out that are starting to like spruce things up a bit, get ready for the Oscar race. But a
Mhm.
thing that I've noticed recently is that, and this was kind of just really starting to happen before the pandemic,
Mhm.
but this is a thing that I feel like has been sped up as a result of it, which is that obviously the only movies that are really making money at the
Mhm.
theaters are the spectacle fare, right? Obviously the Marvel movies, the horror movies, the
Mhm.
Free Guys of the world, really any action movie, right? The ironic thing also being that action movies can do just as well on Netflix, because the
Mhm.
ironic thing is that you had a Ryan Reynolds action comedy that opened in theaters in
Which
August, and
which
then
one?
a Free
Free Gu
Guy.
free Oh, I thought you were talking about Red Notice.
Well, and then you had a Ryan Reynolds, Dwayne Johnson, Gal
Yeah.
Gadot action movie that went straight to Netflix, Red Notice. So like
Yeah.
that's the action movie's in a little bit of a weird spot right now, where that one
Mhm.
really is interchangeable. But I think what's really fascinating about this is seeing how many of like the mid-level budget films
Mhm.
can survive in theaters. That's going to be like what's really interesting going forward, because famously King Richard, which
Mhm.
was the most recent Will Smith Oscar bait film that also opened on HBO Max, second to last HBO Max drop of the year, by the way, before The Matrix.
Mhm.
And that one flopped heavily. The
Mhm.
whole HBO Max simultaneous drop has been really interesting,
Mhm.
but I guess the whole interest of this film, as
Mhm.
far as seeing its box office appeal, is
That is sorry, I don't wanna cut you off.
yeah. Go
That
ahead
is
though.
interesting though, because HBO Max, I think it has brought a lot of people uh, to pay for that as a streaming service so they can make, you know, uh, pretty much any content they wanna make. It's giving the people that are making the shows and movies, I think it's giving them more freedom, because now the money's coming directly from the audience.
Right.
And they're like, when you're paying for Disney Plus, you're like, I want to see Book of Boba. I want to see more Mandalorian. So it is kind of, like people are giving their money to things that they want to see. And it's just everything is on demand. Everyone wants certain things. And I think
Right. It's
the
a
the
much
street
easier
this
way to appeal to the consumer market rather than
yeah.
kind of, provide. And so I think that's also, I'm really glad
Hmm.
to touch on that, because I think that's another of the big reasons why you're seeing streaming
Hmm.
more than anything else, kind of consume the theatrical demand, because the
Hmm.
whole thing with the theatrical experience is that it is a little bit of a give and a take. You are giving up your time, you are giving up your
Hmm.
hard earned dollars, but the payoff is that you could get an experience unlike anything other, versus the at
Hmm.
home consumer based experience. You watch what you want to watch when you want to watch at your own leisure, right? So
Yeah.
that, of course, is the kind of the push pull back and forth of streaming. But the
Hmm.
interesting thing is, and this is kind of like my last point that I think is, this is the thing that I think that not a lot of filmmakers and just people in Hollywood are really seeing, which is that
Hmm.
the not necessarily people our age, right, or people like us who like we've been brought up on movies, we love going to the movies, our entire life and existence has been around the traditional movie going experience. But if you
Hmm.
talk and look at like average like consumers, like people just don't in general like watching movies per se. Like the whole reason why you've been seeing the whole like movies need to be spectacle, movies need to be
Mhm.
events, movies need to be like they need to have that extra edge. I think that's a big reason
Yeah.
why you're gonna start to see video game movies make a big
Yeah.
they're gonna get a big push forward, is because
Yeah.
Resident Evil I just watched the new Resident Evil movie recently, Resident Evil Raccoon City, and that was a
Mhm,
movie that I went having no expectations for. I'm not a
mhm.
video game guy. I've never played it. The only thing I know about the Resident Evil is the Mila Djokovic, Paul
Yeah.
W.S. Anderson, however many friggin' of those movies that they made. And
Hmm.
the thing that shot the hell out of me about Raccoon City is mostly just that it was a competently made film. And
Mhm.
that, of course, the people who showed up for it are going to be the diehard video
Yeah.
game heads. And so I think that right now is going to be a market because that,
Mhm.
I mean, the gaming audience just general. I mean, you've played video games, so you can tell me better than more. Like the gaming
Mhm.
audience, that's like that's
Yeah.
like the superhero audience on steroids. You know, like you're gonna
I think
like
yeah.
what filmmaking has become now is it is, and I've been talking about this for a couple of years right now, right? The transition of these niches into the mainstream, right? You saw it with
Mhm.
superhero and nerd culture, right? That's good. Now you're going to start to see it with more like video game IP stuff like that. That's kind of
Mhm.
the next step, right? And so I guess that more than anything else is what's scaring these filmmakers, is because these filmmakers, a lot of them, you know, especially the older ones, they came up in a time
Mhm.
where filmmaking essentially was really the only media, and so they could
Mhm.
effectively tell these really interesting and engaging stories about reality. And now you're having these filmmakers try to tell these stories in a
Mhm.
decade and an era where everybody just wants to tune out from reality. You know, reality is
Yeah.
just so overbearing, so overwhelming, really now more so than anything else, because of the constant social media push, because of the constant big
Mhm.
tech push, constant 24-hour news cycle, everything
Yeah.
getting pushed in your face. Your neuron receptors can't handle it. And so
Yeah.
that's why
It's overwhelming. It's
exactly.
overwhelming.
Exactly. That's why you're starting to see more of a
Mhm.
push into like kind of these new arenas of escapism. That to
Mhm.
me is why superheroes are having such a success story right now. I think they're making a little bit of a mistake by constantly trying to push real world politics into
Mhm.
superhero films and just pop culture entertainment in general. But that is,
Mhm.
for me at least, why kind of the argument appeals towards those types of filmmakers. But how that affects something like House of Gucci, like I think at
Mhm.
the end of the day, ultimately, I'm kind of surprised that this hasn't already found like a major thing with like the meme audience, right? Because I mean, you see a movie like this is like a
Mhm.
ripe target for the meme makers, you know? Like again, I mean, again, it's like opening night, like you'll see like the first 50 million memes pop up,
Mhm.
you know? Like what superhero movie do you know now? Forget that. What superhero trailer can you see now that doesn't already have like 15 million memes pop up? Like I'm
Yeah.
still seeing
Spider-Man I mean, Spider-Man.
exactly. I'm still
Hold on.
seeing new Spider-Man. Yeah, I'm still seeing new Spider-Man memes pop up all
Mhm.
over the place. But my big thing is um and again, like I guess kind of the source of dissatisfaction that comes from me is that while the movie in and of itself is kind of um interesting, but not necessarily for the right reasons. My whole thing that I'm worried about is as these filmmakers continue to make movies consistently for themselves, it seems you're gonna see this growing divide between them and
Mhm.
audiences. Like Spielberg is making West Side Story
Mhm.
again. It's like, guy, you
Yeah.
could just go and watch the original. Like, I really don't know what this is going to contribute ultimately. And like Scorsese kind of
Yeah.
lucked out because Scorsese kind of hooked himself onto the streaming train. That usually
Mhm.
bodes pretty well for auteur filmmakers, right? He made The Irishman for Netflix. He's making Killers of the Flower Moon for Apple
Mhm.
TV. Apple TV is also bankrolling his next film about which is gonna star Jonah Hill as Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead band member. They also obviously are bankrolling the Joel Cohen, solo
Mhm.
Cohen, Tragedy of Macbeth adaptation with Denzel,
That
which
looks
looks
great. Yeah.
unbelievable. So like the
Yeah.
streamers are really going to be the places to look forward,
Mhm.
to look going forward, obviously, for a long form filmmaking. So I guess that's why
Mhm.
Scott's apprehension towards streaming, if there is any, right? There's no obvious proof of it. I guess is a
Mhm.
little bit confusing to me because pretty much all of his peers are going towards streaming. Spielberg's next film is
I
going to
mean,
Netflix.
I think he's trying to, preserve the art and the experience of going to the theater. I mean, Spielberg, even a few years ago, was against Netflix films even getting,
Right.
being
But
nominated
those dollars though,
unless they were in
when Netflix is the only one to bet when Netflix was the only
but they
one.
have their theaters now, so that's the big
True,
difference.
true.
He
But
was
that but
like
that's only for Oscar. That's only so they
yeah,
can get around the whole Oscars hating them thing. Let's be real here.
yeah, yeah, I mean,
Because let's
you
face it,
said
Netflix was
something
the
earlier
yeah.
you said something earlier that was interesting about, escapism and how, with how much media there is, it's a little overwhelming. I totally agree, but there's also something to be said about how much free content there is being made. Like YouTube also helped change the game because people are just making what they want and they have so much freedom to be or make what they want. And I think like we were talking about with like corporations kind of hopping on the bandwagon. I mean, you go to the trending page, it's not YouTubers anymore. You see Jimmy Fallon, you see Jimmy Kimmel, you see all these late night, clips that are being uploaded, and that's obviously bringing them tons more money. But when it comes to small screen versus big screen, I don't think TV is dying. I just think less people are watching now because there's streaming, because there's the internet, because it's so easy to find and watch content that you want in a separate way. I don't think cable is dead. I think it still is it's still huge. Um but when it comes to movies, it does feel like they're dying a little bit because of the past year. I mean, I try and go as much as I can. I think you and I both are physical media people, like books and having DVDs and or Blu-ray or you
Depends on the
know
day, is what I'll say.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've picked up a few things on, like, Criterion Collection or Blu-ray that I felt, very strongly about. So I have, like, a little bit of, some movie collection. I one of my friend's dad gave me his old VHS collection. We have that, downstairs. So I'm still pretty big physical media person. I mean, there's nothing like sitting down and reading a book or having the physical case. It feels a little more authentic. I guess that's the word to say. Or, it's a little more personal.
Right.
Um
I mean, because that's the
yeah.
whole. I mean, you and I, again, we both remember watching those videos back in film school about the differences
Mhm.
and the people who support digital versus physical media, and like the biggest
Yeah.
arguments against digital media in general. And Quentin Tarantino has been talking about this for a
Mhm.
long, long time, long before streaming was a thing. Is just the overall quality of it, right? He
Mhm.
says it himself. It's like it makes the what's it called, it makes the format feel more disposable, and
Mhm.
that's ultimately what you've been seeing with
Yeah.
the breaking down of streaming is the increased disposability of media. Where just think about it, right? You think
Mhm.
about like back in the day when they only had reels of film, and if they fucked it up, that was it.
Yeah.
Like just think about just how much value it places on it, and all of a sudden the
Yeah.
massive amounts of thousands upon millions of dollars that are thrown into this industry. It makes
Was
sense. But now,
Mhm.
obviously, with how consumable and how easy it all is, right? And
Mhm.
filmmakers have talked about this too. They're like, yeah, of course, what's the number
Mhm.
one thing in order to decrease the value of something? Make more of it and make it as easily accessible as possible, you
Yeah.
know?
Do you know, was House of Gucci shot on, film, or was it
If I'm
digital?
not mistaken, it was shot on film, but I got to do
Which
some
makes
research
sense
on
because
that.
it's Scott, so he's like, "I want it
Right.
on film."
He's
Obviously,
definitely
it's
going to
gonna
be a
be
more
on
traditionalist
film,
in that sense.
obviously. I mean, I think it's much cheaper and much easier to do digital, but film just has a little bit more of again,
Right.
it's about authenticity, the art form, the color that picks up on film,
Right.
and the actual resolution is way different. I mean, it's not way different. Digital sensors have been, they've been
They've been
made
getting
and
better. They've been
I
getting
mean,
better. Like
they're
Netflix's like
amazing.
Netflix's
They're
cameras
amazing.
are insane what they're able to do. But
They're
absolutely,
yeah.
yeah. But like just to give a perfect example though, just as far as like in order to like kind of contribute to the film experience, right? Like
Mhm.
every time now I see something where I can see the film grain on screen, I don't know, like it just adds like an extra level of like a special feeling to that film. Like I remember when I was down at New York Film Festival back in October and I watched Come On, Come On and Red Rocket. Both those films, I could see
Mhm.
the grain on every frame and it looked
Yeah.
beautiful. It felt like I was watching art, and I'm like, wow, so
That's
this is where it
yeah.
comes from. This is what people are talking about when they say preserving, like the
That's
idea
another
of
that's
film.
another separate conversation. I
Yeah.
also saw Come On, Come
Oh
On
yeah, we got to talk
a few
about that
nights ago.
definitely. But I,
Um,
I guess if I can wrap up our conversation just about House of Gucci, just in general,
yeah.
my final thoughts on it.
Mhm.
So it's a film that in hindsight, I definitely didn't hate as much
Mhm.
as I thought I was going to, but it's definitely not one of my favorites of the year. I guess as far as like me recommending this to people, if you want to see something that is just kind of baffling and semi-entertaining in
Mhm.
like a little bit of a farcical way, but without actually like kind of understanding like how it's being farcical or what it's attempting to satirize. If it's
Mhm.
trying to be a satire, sure, I guess this is good. The narrative is compelling
Mhm.
enough. The characters are interesting enough. I think that kind of the story is
Mhm.
good, but ultimately the kind of lack of consistent tone, lack of real like kind of
Mhm.
purpose and aim as far as what it's trying to accomplish and what it's trying to say within the story, and overall
Mhm.
just complete, again, as Tom Ford said, attempting to just ham it up beyond recognition from the actors. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
this only gets a 3.5 out of 5 stars from me. What about you?
3.5 out of 5 stars. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I mean, if it was out of 10, again, I think it was just, maybe a 7, 7.5. So, yeah, I guess a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Um, I don't think I mean, it didn't come off like an intentional satire in the way that Wolf of Wall Street was, which goes way over people's
Right,
heads. I mean, there are
right,
tons of, all these finance people and business students that they look at Jordan Belfort like, "Oh, I wanna be
right. As a
him."
role model, right, and that goes back to the
He's
Fight
and
Club
he
thing,
is
right?
and he is not a role model. The people watching those movies and
Same people who
misinterpreting
say
it,
that it's the same people who say that, oh, Goodfellas embellishes the mob. And it's like, yeah, if you actually watch the
yes,
movie, you would understand that
you
it
understand,
doesn't.
yeah, because Scorsese grew up around that life and that
Right,
and is not trying to glamorize it in any way, but it has been glamorized.
right.
And, going back to House of Gucci, I mean, I'm a big satire fan. To me, it didn't feel like a satire, so I'm gonna have to go with probably a 3.5, 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. So with
Mhm.
that being said, people, that was it for our review of House of Gucci. Let us know your
Yep.
thoughts in the comments section below. Make sure you guys have an extra special Thanksgiving, even though by the time this episode goes up, Thanksgiving will be over. But make sure that you stay safe with your families on that day. Make sure you get something nice for your guys' selves, maybe some early Christmas present for the rest of your family on Black Friday. Remember to treat your retail workers with respect, because trust me, they don't want to be there in those work establishments. Adam, thank you so much for coming back on to host this with me, dude. This was an
Thank you for having me.
absolute blast to have you back on. I'm definitely going to have you back on more so for the channel. Like I said, I'm trying to
Sweet.
expand the Talkin TV kind of rotating cast of players now, and I'm definitely
Mhm.
adding you to the roster. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
You can follow me. I mean, I'm not huge on social, but if you want, follow me at Adam Somer Films with underscores on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram. If you look up Adam Somer, it should be at MRARS 97. And then there's a different. There's two. I have two accounts. There's one that I made years ago as like a prank, as like a fake account. It
Troll
was
account. I love it.
yeah, no, I mean, I don't use that one. I use the other one more so. Um, yeah, so if you want to follow me there, that's where I'm at. So yeah, thank you.
Of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram as always. And of course, be sure to follow the Talkin TV podcast social medias at Talkin TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Like I said, we got 4 weeks left in the year, people. We've still got more content coming your way. We've got 3 episodes left in our Succession recap series. Episode 7 is coming out this week. I've got a couple more top 10 lists for you guys. We've got a whole bunch of Marvel content planned for the end of the year for when Spider-Man comes out. Be sure to keep tuning in until the
That's
end
gonna
of the
be good.
year for more content. Be sure to also click the subscribe button, click the like button, click the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. For myself and Adam, as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.